Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 247 of CryptoBiography, and it is part 13 of the Isle of Bronze. So we're back to the story, and here we go. Nasramin left Linus and returned to his chambers. Mawaya was waiting for him. Asazi came by, she said to him from her favorite chair. You went to see Linus? I did, he said, and related his visit. He won't help us in the end. But he is correct. The people may well see us taking steps to defend the island and fear. The more I think about it, the more I think Linus will take the opportunity to increase his power with the populace. Then it's time to hamstring the wolf, Mawaya said. How? The people believe in our religion. Not that way. By cutting off the fear. Meet with people across the island, every local leader, every person looked up to by his or her neighbors. Then tell them of the coming of iron, what it means. Tell them why you're bolstering their defenses. Ask how you can help them, and ask for their help in return. You will then kill the fear in the egg. Nasramin thought about this. I am, yet again, glad you are my wife. This is the path I will take. She took his hand. Let us go to bed, then. That night, Mawaya fell asleep in his arms. But Nasramin couldn't find his rest. He kept thinking about his new plans, as Mawaya had suggested. He thought of the people he would have to tell, and how, and in what groups. Who would have to be told first? Who would get more information? Would anyone be sworn to secrecy on certain details? Or would that keep the information from traveling the way he needed it to? No, he decided, whatever details he decided to give out, it would have to be freely shared. If he needed to assuage some men's egos, he would have to do it by telling them earlier rather than more. He got out of bed, disentangling himself from his wife, and put on some robes. He walked out of their chambers and down the short walk towards his gardens. He waited a moment while the guards removed the heavy bronze bar blocking the thick door. Then he went out. The door would remain open, with the two guards waiting for his return. There were always guards at the outer gates of the garden, and watching the walls to prevent anyone climbing in. There had never been a successful assassination of a king since the discovery of bronze ore on the island, but he was constantly prepared against it. I'm going to redo that last paragraph. There had never been a successful assassination of a king since the discovery of bronze on the island, but he was constantly prepared against it. But now, with no one near him, and a half-moon brightening the grounds, he enjoyed a very slow walk. He found himself trying not to make noise on the graveled path, not principally to hear possible attackers, but because he enjoyed hearing the sounds of the night. He could hear some grasshoppers, though just a few, off in the distance, and a bit of rustling from the breeze that barely seemed to touch him. He walked nearly silently, enjoying the alone time that he got sometimes in the morning in his garden, but hardly ever had at night. He couldn't help but have his mind wander soon, thinking of the various efforts he had undertaken and wondering how they would all work out. But the blessed night helped, so that his mind was able to wander, not focus exclusively on his worries. Soon he was aware of another night noise. He couldn't tell exactly what it was. A slight noise, possibly he thought the injured cry of an animal. There were no large animals to be found in his garden, but perhaps a rabbit or a vole or mouse had been dropped by an owl and was crying, injured. He stopped and listened to it. Could it be, in fact, the squeak of armor of some enemy? No, it didn't sound like it came from some man-made object. The noise continued. It was sometimes louder, sometimes softer. It seemed to him it was coming from the direction of the middle of the garden. He did not think it was an enemy. He decided to see what it was. But caution slowed his steps and quieted his movements even more. Shortly he peered around a hedge toward the middle of his garden. There he had several simple but lovely benches for him or his rare guest to sit. Along the length of one of them was Theodora, clearly naked, lying on her back. Another person had their head buried between her thighs. It was Hama. He froze, torn between breaking up the scene immediately and leaving. Then he pulled back so he was around the hedge and out of their sight, if either lover happened to be distracted enough to notice him. He knew his daughter. This wasn't something she would do on a whim. This had been ongoing for some time. She would understand some of the problems this would cause for her, for him, for their people. But she didn't know everything he knew. She knew only part. Perhaps she didn't understand fully the troubles she would be brewing for them. And then there was Hugo, who was clearly ramping up to, at the very least, consider Theodora as his bride. There's one last thought of storming around the corner and breaking it up. But useless, quite useless. Really, the damage had clearly been done. He would have to find out more. The stirrings of his plan were already rolling around in his head. He turned and, trying not to make noise, yet also trying not to hear any more from the center of his garden, slowly trod back to the palace. There the guards met him and accompanied him to his chambers. If they thought his stroll had been much shorter than his wont, he did not know and did not much care, as long as they knew nothing about his daughter and Theodora. Though his mind was spinning worse than it was when he had left his wife in their bed, the fact that he had a plan, plus coming down from what he had realized had been a heart-pounding shock, meant that within moments he was asleep in Mawaya's arms. The next morning, very early, he went to the family dining room. He had asked his people to rouse Hama and have her meet him here. He wanted it to seem neither too formal nor too informal. He had considered telling Mawaya about the situation and even bringing her along, but decided that he would determine the extent of the situation and then let his wife know later. Hama entered alone. She took in the situation with a glance. "Father?" she asked. "Let us talk," he said, and gestured to the chair next to his. She came over and sat by him. She was tense. He didn't try to confuse things by using diplomatic language. "I saw you and Theodora in my garden last night." Hama froze completely. Nasramin could tell they had not noticed him. "This complicates things. But let's find out how complicated it is first. How long have you been lovers?" Hama took a moment. "Several weeks." So it's serious, he thought. "How do you two feel about each other?" "For my part, I love her." "And she?" "The same, I think." "I'm having her invited to this meeting as well, but you're my daughter, so I wanted a chance to discuss things with you first. I didn't expect this. I'm surprised that Theodora allowed it to happen, though." Hama looked a little angry at this. "What do you mean?" "I mean, royal women of our island aren't required to have a family to keep the line going, but in Thebes they are. Theodora would know she is likely to have to marry a royal man, whether here or elsewhere, and try to have royal children. Did you two discuss this at all?" Hama shook her head. "Are you aware of how seriously Callus will take it if her daughter tries to run off with you?" "I know." "So this is what? A fling? A fling lasting weeks?" "I didn't mean to fall in love." He could hear the fear and the defensiveness in her voice and realized his anger had shown in his own. He took a breath and said, "Of course not. Sometimes love is like that. It was for your mother and me, both. But in our case, we didn't have to think about obstacles. You do, or at least you should have." Hama was tearing up now, and Nasramin himself felt a strange tugging somewhere inside his throat. He reached over to her chair and put his arm around her shoulder. "I have Theodora coming over shortly. We will talk this over with her as well. And then? And then we have to consider Shugo. and what his intentions are. Hama looked deeply unhappy about that, but said nothing. And that's the story for this week. Obviously, there's more to tell, and we've gotten back in the swing of things. I've been enjoying writing this, as I hope shows. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2022, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.